Well, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Belle Jarneski, and on behalf of the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada, I'd like to welcome you to our Holocaust and Human Rights Symposium. I would like to begin by acknowledging that this event is being live streamed from ancestral lands on Treaty 1 territory. We acknowledge that we are gathered on Treaty 1 territory and that Manitoba is located on the treaty territories and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, Dakota Oyate, Dene Sulin, and Nehethowik nations. We also acknowledge that Manitoba is located on the homeland of the Red River Métis, and that northern Manitoba includes lands that were and are the ancestral lands of the Inuit. We respect the spirit and intent of treaties and treaty making and remain committed to working in partnership with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people in the spirit of truth, reconciliation, and collaboration. We also affirm that our commitment to never forget must also include confronting attempts to destroy Indigenous culture and nationhood and condemning attempts to deny that historical reality. We'd like to thank the sponsors of the symposium and of our work throughout the year, the Grossberg Endowment Fund at the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba, the Asper Foundation, and the Azrieli Foundation. And we are also grateful to the Jewish Federation of Winnipeg for their year-round support. Thank you, too, to the Holocaust Education Committee of the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada and to the staff. It has been 22 years since our first symposium. For 20 of those years, our symposium took place at the University of Winnipeg. Up to 2,000 students from grades 9 through 12 gathered each year to listen and learn as a survivor of the Holocaust, Nazi persecution, or subsequent genocides shared their painful and yet inspirational stories. Since COVID, we have moved to a virtual format. We are now able to include students from outside of Winnipeg. We've also been able to make this program available to students in middle schools and universities, and even to the broader public. I am thrilled to welcome students from 55 Manitoba schools today, and our total attendees tops the 3,000 mark. I want to thank all the wonderful teachers for bringing their students to this important event, but also for the important work that you do in your classrooms, teaching your students about this tragic chapter of human history and how easily hate, conspiracy theories, and propaganda facilitated a genocide. In 2002, the late Elie Wiesel said, "Whoever listens to a witness becomes a witness." Today, you have an incredible opportunity to hear from a witness, a survivor of the Holocaust. Nearly 80 years since the end of World War II, the very memory of the Holocaust is under siege through denial, distortion, and conspiracy theories. Today, we are witnessing a staggering rise in anti-Semitism, and sadly, it often seems as if the world has learned nothing and seemingly forgets that by 1945, the voices of 2 out of every 3 European Jews had been silenced forever, that 6 million men, women, and children were murdered simply because they were Jews. The youngest of our survivors, those few children who survived the inferno, are nearing 90 years of age, and many who were in their teens at the time of the Shoah are now well into their 90s. You are among the last group of students who will be fortunate enough to hear a Holocaust survivor speak. We're counting on you to remember this day throughout your lives and to take on the responsibility of being a witness and to carry the voices of our survivors forward. Now, a quick word of housekeeping. First, a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. Please enter any questions that you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, not the chat. We'd love it if you'd include your name and your school, but if you prefer to ask your questions anonymously, that's okay too. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Michelle Sadowski is an experienced educator with almost 20 years working in the field of education. As the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor, she was always drawn to the stories and history of her family. Now, as the educator for the Holocaust Survivor Memoirs program, she works to create engaging and meaningful educational materials that highlight the memoirs by Canadian Holocaust survivors. In addition to developing new materials and working closely with the survivor authors, Michelle facilitates educator workshops and professional development opportunities across the country. And she will be interviewing our Holocaust survivor, Mariette Doduck, today. Mariette Rosen Doduck was born in Brussels, Belgium in 1935. She was only 5 years old when the Nazis invaded her hometown of Brussels in 1940. Soon, her family was torn apart, and Mariette and her siblings were scattered across the city and countryside, hiding with non-Jews and in convents and orphanages, or working for the resistance. Mariette immigrated to Canada in 1947 as a war orphan with 3 of her siblings and settled in Vancouver, though I learned today that she did live in Winnipeg for a couple of weeks. In 1955, she married her husband Sidney and raised 3 children. Mariette has received awards for her community leadership work and activism. She is involved in Holocaust education and is a co-founder of the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center. She is the author of the Azrieli Survivor Memoir, A Childhood Unspoken, and a reminder to teachers that you can order Mariette's memoir for your class from the Azrieli Foundation at no cost. And so, Mariette and Michelle, I am honored to turn over the virtual microphone to you.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here with all of you on Zoom today. It seems like we're spanning the country today since I'm in Toronto and Mariette is in Vancouver and you are right in the middle in Manitoba. So this is such a beautiful example of how the internet has really brought people closer together, and it's a beautiful thing. My name is Michelle Sadowski, and like Belle said so nicely, I am the educator for the Azrieli Foundation's Holocaust Survivor Memoirs program. We have existed since 2005, and since then, it's really been our main goal to collect and preserve and share the memoirs that have been written by survivors of the Holocaust who moved to Canada at some point after the war. And since then, we've published 126 author stories in the formats of memoirs and diaries and anthologies. And like Belle said, our books are offered for free for students in both English and French. And we have really given more than 800,000 copies of our books away. Marie, your book is amazing because we've already had to reprint your book, which was like setting records, which is amazing. But it's really a beautiful thing that we get to give these books away for free. And that's something that's a big part of our mandate. And before we dive into our conversation, I know Belle touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to take just a quick moment to really talk about where the Holocaust sits in terms of talking about anti-Semitism, because we have seen a major uptick in anti-Semitism globally, but specifically in Canada. If you're unfamiliar with the term, I'll just define it for you quickly, but really anti-Semitism is simply the hatred of Jewish people in any form. It is deeply ingrained into many societies, sadly, including our own. It's existed for thousands of years before the Holocaust. Anti-Semitism predates it's really like the birthplace of Christianity is where anti-Semitism historically goes back to. And has existed long since the Holocaust as well. So when we talk about the Holocaust and where that exists with anti-Semitism, we know that it is a piece of a much larger conversation. But today, with social media platforms like TikTok and fake news and all of these pieces that were never things we had to think about before, anti-Semitism is worse and more visible than ever before. So now you guys have a really important job. That is that you need to be really critical when you think about what you see on the internet. You need to ask questions. You need to fact check your sources, and you need to really think about using credible information when you research current events. You really need to think to yourself, what am I looking at? Who made this? Where is the information from? What biases do they have? Who is the intended audience? And how do I know that it's true? Is there a source to back this up? And that will really allow you to make sure that the information that you are using to make decisions is accurate and credible. The Holocaust is often the first time that many people learn about Jewish people. I know that especially in different places in Canada, there might be large Jewish populations nearby, and there might be not one single Jewish person who lives in that town or city. And so often people learn about Jewish people through the lens of the Holocaust, and only through the lens of the Holocaust, which we know is a really dark period of history, especially for Jewish people. Jews, in that sense, are mainly presented as victims. And so it neglects a whole conversation around who are the Jewish people and what does Jewish life mean? And so I encourage everybody to explore Jewish culture, religion, food, values, customs, all of those beautiful pieces that lend itself to a diverse, beautiful Jewish life, both before the war and in current day. And know that Jewish people currently live all over the world, but we have roots in Europe, in the Middle East, in Ethiopia, in India. And if you look, there's a beautiful map on an exhibit that shows you that there are Jewish communities really all over the world. And while it might look different in all of those places, those core values and those customs are connected. It's a people, it's a connection of peoplehood. So I encourage you to dive more deeply into learning about Jewish people beyond just the context of the Holocaust. That really is where this understanding of individuality and diversity and acceptance will come from. So enough about all of those pieces. I really want to focus on why we're really here today. And that is really to get to speak with Mariette. And it's such a pleasure. I work with Mariette very, very closely. And so for us, this is just like two gals getting together and having a conversation. But I'm going to ask some questions. And then after, I know if you are interested in asking some other questions about things that you didn't get to hear about, we have the Q&A open like Belle mentioned. And so have your teacher type into the chat to ask our question. So Mariette, did you want to say hi to everyone?
Hello, everybody. I can't see you, but you can see me, but I know you're out there. And I hope that my talk today will make more understanding of what is happening in our world today, because for me, this is a repetition of my childhood. What I see today, what has happened around the world, the hatred, the killing, the abuse, the rapes. I saw that as a child that should never have seen those things.
Speaking of you as a child, Mariette, can you tell us a little bit about your childhood? If we were to open the door into your home as a child, what was that like for you in your home and family life before the war?
For me, it was only good things in my family because I'm the youngest of 11. And so there was a lot of noise, a lot of family around all the time. I didn't know my father. He died when I was around 3 years old, 2.5. So I never really knew my father because from what I understand from my older siblings is that he was traveling around trying to make a living. So I don't know too much about my father, only what my other siblings, the older ones, have told me about. But I would say the happiest thoughts in my life was being with my mother and my brother and sisters. I had 8 brothers and 2 sisters. I have now 2 brothers and 1 sister and I that are left in our family. And my sister just turned 92, and my brother 94, and my other brother 90, which is unusual for survivors to live so long since the government told us we were going to die by the age of 30 when we came to Canada. And we were not wanted. But history of my family was also, for me, was the beach. where my family used to go in the summer, and that was the earliest happy memories that I know. And after that, there is no happiness memories after that. I left home and I went into hiding. And for 5 years, since the war ended, I was hiding. I was not with families. I lived with, as Belle said in my bio, I lived with non-Jewish people. I lived on farms. I lived in orphanages. I lived in convents, traveled all over the country. Unbeknown to me was that I was used in the French resistance, which I didn't find out till years later, as my brother Jean and my sister Sarah were in the French resistance. And I have a gift of a photographic memory and languages. And languages is what saved my life throughout the war. When I came to Canada, I spoke 7 languages. English and Hebrew was the 2 I had to learn here.
Thank you. And can you tell us a little bit about sort of the town that you grew up in? So I know that we know that Jewish people lived all over Europe, and some were in big cities and small towns and shtetls, and just where were you in all of that?
Brussels. My city of birth was Brussels. I did go back to Europe to see where I lived. Of course, it wasn't, after the war, it wasn't our place. I was 10 years old. There was no, my house wasn't there anymore. Our family weren't there anymore. Nothing in the house was ours anymore. But Brussels, being a big city, I remember it must have been in the Jewish district because my mother had a store there, and she went to the mikveh there. A mikveh is the ritual bath that women went to, and it was a beautiful city. When I went back, it wasn't anymore.
And your siblings, so were you old enough to be in school before the war, or had school not started yet for you?
School had not started. I never went to school until I was 12 years old, and I went to school here in Canada and started grade 1 at the age of 12.
And so your siblings were in school, and were they in a public school, or did they go to Jewish school, or was there a mix of both?
My sister Esther was in a kindergarten across the street from where we lived. It was a front window, and she was in this, so it must have been a private school, I think, because we lived in a Jewish district, and that's all I know. Of course, it wasn't Jewish when I came back to the city and to my place of birth, but she was in kindergarten. Esther went to school. I learned to read and write in French under a kitchen table, and in a convents, I guess, and orphanages where I was, I guess, able to attend. I don't know. I learned to read and write by learning myself under a kitchen table after the children that I was staying at went to bed, because the woman of the house didn't want me learning anything. So I was a child of silence, which is what I became when I left home.
We'll come back to that. We will. So tell us a little bit about when you needed to start wearing a yellow star on your clothing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
My mother sewed the yellow star on my dress. And when I went down the street to play outside, the children started to call me names. And I assumed that they didn't like the yellow star, so I used to rip it off because they wouldn't play with me anymore on the street and in the courtyard, I think. And my mother wore the yellow star. Sarah wore the yellow star too. The Jewish community had to wear the yellow star.
And can you tell a little bit about why that was?
Because we were Jews. We had to be
Identified?
Identified, thank you, Michelle. Identified by the yellow star. When I came on the ship to Canada, I threw that star away. I'm sorry that I did, because it would have been something, but I didn't want a memory. So yellow star was, but I never wore it after I went into hiding, of course.
Mhm.
But whenever I came back in from the street, my mother would sew the yellow star. We were identified. We were abused by that because the children called me names, and I felt it was because of the star, but I didn't know I was Jewish. Children are not born with a religion. Children are taught a religion. They're taught hate. They're taught love. They're taught sweetness, hugging. I only had that in my house. I never had it after I left home.
Thank you. So you were 5 when the Nazis invaded Brussels, and you talk about being a child survivor. Can you explain what that term means?
That my parents or my family were murdered. Were one of the 6 million people that were murdered. That children, the 1,500,000 children that were murdered, I survived that, which made me a child survivor. Surviving on the street or surviving hiding is not something that we or my children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren have to go through, which is what might have happen if the world doesn't listen to what is happening on anti-Semitism, that they again want us dead. They don't want us to have our own country, our own religion, our own rights. But we are not the people of the past. In my childhood, the Jews turned the other cheeks. Today, we don't turn the other cheeks. We have a homeland. We stand up. We are very strong, and we will fight this. We will survive because this is who and what we are and our strength. Jewish, as you said, Michelle, we are in every country in the world, has become one family. We are all connected today because of what happened on October 7th in Israel. It's not a matter of being all alone. We are a large family all over the world. We are not going to lie down like our past.
Thank you. How do you think the fact that you were so young when the war started, how do you think that impacted you? Like maybe it was better that you were younger because you kind of just did what you were told, or maybe it was worse that you were younger because you couldn't be independent. So how do you think that it impacted you being so young?
Well, my background of Judaism and of European, being from Polish family for generations, we were taught not to fight, not to argue, not to make trouble. Ask me the question again.
How it impacted you that you were so young?
It made me, as I said before, when I had to leave home and I had to say goodbye to my mother, and I became a child of silence with no feeling. I became a robot because my brother Jean told me I mustn't cry. I must never make trouble. I must never rock the boat. I never ask questions, never ask direction, never give my last name, never say that I'm Jewish, what I didn't know what it meant at all. It impacted me that even coming to Canada, learned how to hide Mariette and created Marie, the person you see today.
That's a perfect segue into my next question. It's like, okay. It's like you really knew that was my next question. So an important theme of your book is really how your experiences during the Holocaust impacted your identity and your relationships and just generally how you exist in the world. But somebody might notice that on your book, it says Marie, but I call you Mariette. And in the book, you use both names. So can you explain a little bit, who is Mariette? Who is Marie? What is the dynamic between both of those names?
I am Mariette, the child survivor, but the woman you see today, I created to fit as a Canadian woman. I hid all my life, most of my life, I hid even in Canada, including, and so I became Marie. I am two people. Today, I am sitting in front of you as Mariette, the survivor who survived the atrocities of the Second World War, who is now trying to survive this hatred in the world today and teaching my children strength. I would say Mariette is my strength. Marie is a nice lady, just don't cross Mariette.
Absolutely. So you came to Canada as a part of something called the War Orphans Project, which I know lots about because it's my job to know a lot about it. And you know lots about because you came through it. But I imagine that our students don't know so much about the War Orphans Project. So can you explain a little bit about what it was?
The Jewish Congress since 1942, 41, 42, went all over Europe trying to save and smuggle the Jewish children out of the country, to buy them out from the government, to try to pay personal payment to free a child from Europe. The Jewish Congress fought until I came to Canada in 1947. It took that long to save. There was a group called Kinden Transport, which was saved and went to England. I was not in that group because I was not in England. I was in Europe and Brussels, Antwerp, everywhere in Europe. It was through the Jewish Congress that I was able to come to Canada. And again, the shared, a word that everyone should learn is fate. Should, that's what the word means. 4 of us children, sibling, all of the same family, was able to come to Canada. We didn't know that we would be accepted in Canada, the United States. My brother Henri, by chance, and myself met at the City Hall at the time when, after the war, when the Jewish Congress had put posters on every building, I don't know what it's called, that where they, in the city, where the columns that they put.
Yeah, where you could put news, like local.
Right, news advertising on those columns. They said anyone that wanted to leave, Jewish children, to go to City Hall and applied, and which I did. And my brother Henri was at the same time, and he was able, and I, because he was older than I, to get a passport. He and I on one, and Jacques and Esther on another. And I don't know if it was a flip of a coin that I came to Canada instead of the United States, but I'm one of 1,123 child survivors that were accepted in Canada in 1947, and only 2,000 in the whole of the United States.
That's right. That's absolutely right. It was really interesting. So for those who don't know, there was really 3 main ways that people came to Canada after the war. One was through labor projects or labor contracts, like logging or being a tailor or things like that. Someone could also sponsor somebody as a general, like family member or close relative, or the War Orphans Project, which was an amazing program. But the interesting piece about this was that the government of Canada, the Labor Department, told the Canadian Jewish Congress that the burden was on the Jewish community to care for these 1,123 Jewish children that came after the war, and they came between 47 and 49. And so before we start to talk about how the Jewish community did that with the host families, can you tell us, so you arrived Pier 21 in Halifax, which really interestingly enough, last November, I was so lucky to be able to bring Marie back to Halifax for the first time in 75 years. And it was so beautiful to be able to tour Pier 21 for you to see it again and validate all of those memories that you had about being there. But can you tell us about arriving at Pier 21 back in 1947 and what that experience was like for you?
It wasn't a good experience arriving in Canada. Our ship that landed in Halifax was the Aquitania, or Aquitania. It was an old ship that brought us Jewish children. When we just ascended from the ship and walked down 2 barbed wire lanes down to the building to Pier 21. Didn't even have the freedom of going anywhere else. It was a barbed wire that we walked down. When we arrived, they gave us a card with a number. Again, we were identified by a number and not by name. Mine was number 73. It was a card that was pinned on my coat. And we stood in line to sign in like cattle, I would say. No one smiled, nobody welcomed, nobody anything was there. We had to walk through corridors and with our little suitcase that we had, and we were searched. We had to give up everything we had. We came with money. I came with a little diamond ring that my sister Sarah had given me before I left. And the diamond was taken out of my ring. I still have the baby ring in my drawer. They took away stuff that they shouldn't from children that came from another world. Mm-hmm. We were a strange bunch. We were children in body, but the mind was of a grown-up. But we understood that we lived through a war with nothing. We scrounged for food. We dealt with the black market, selling stuff so we could make some money. So we came to this country with nothing, and yet we did come with stuff. But at the border, they took everything away from us. None of us complained because, first of all, we were shocked because we were told Canada was a free country. And we know not to trust the police or the border patrols because they were always wanting money in the war and if we wanted something done. So my connection with Canada at the time was not a good one at the beginning. We were not welcomed. Our Prime Minister at that time, Mackenzie King, and his sidekick, Mr. Blair, it's a black spot in our Canadian history, that said none is too many. A book was written by Dr. Arabella, who wrote a book. It's in the library. You can read it up. It's called None is Too Many. They told us that we were useless, that we were garbage, that we wouldn't help the country. We would live off the country. Well, the 40 children that came with me to Vancouver at the end of 1948, none of us lived off the government. As a matter of fact, we built this country, this city, all the cities, and never took a cent that I didn't earn.
Beautiful. Can you tell us about your journey all the way? We were talking Halifax to Vancouver, so it couldn't go any further from east to west. Can you tell us about your journey traveling from Halifax to Vancouver and the few big points along the way? One of them was Winnipeg, so we'll get there.
Okay. One was, of course, we were the French children, not all of us. So we were supposed to go to Montreal. The Jewish Congress had found Jewish homes. Some of those homes were paid by the Jewish government or the Jewish yes,
Congress?
the office, yes, paid for the homes so they would take in children. The trains, we traveled by train in those days, and in those days to stop the train, you pulled the chain on the top and it would stop the train. It's not like today. And we had 20 minutes stay in Montreal or a half an hour. And the lady that was traveling with us said, why don't you take a walk around and talk to people? And I said, fine. I walked around, came back on the train, and I said, nobody speaks French here. They speak a patois, and I'm not staying here. Now, you've got to remember, I'm 11 and a half, I think almost 12. And I told the lady I'm not staying in Montreal.
Can you explain what a patois means? Because I'm not sure if everyone knows. So you spoke French, like European French, which is different. So can you explain the difference?
Unless you speak English and French at the same time, that is called a patois. I can speak it, of course, now, but when I go to Montreal, I'm automatically said, people say to me, you're Belge. Tu es Belgique. Tu es Belge. I said, yes. She said, oui. I still have the French accent, it seems, and I don't think I do, but they seem to know by my French that I am Belgian. Patois is 2 languages put together. You speak half a word of English and half a word of French. So unless you knew English, which I didn't at that time, I didn't understand a word they said. But I have to say though, but in Quebec, in the Gaspé area, they speak a perfect Belgian French there. Absolutely perfect. And I've never heard that they spoke a patois there. So we went back on the train, and of course the next stop was Winnipeg. And Winnipeg at that time in 1947 was where all the Jewish Congress put the children that they picked up from Europe there. Winnipeg was the largest Jewish community at that time, around 35,000 Jewish families. It is not that anymore. Toronto and Montreal, I think, is the largest now. And we stayed. I was fortunate again. My sister and I stayed with a lovely family, Jewish family, but I would not stay in Winnipeg. Too much snow. In those days, snow was very high, and it was like, I just spoke to Belle this morning when I thought it was like in the low 40s, and so did she agree in those minus 40 in those days. It is not today. The weather change. So I stayed there until I said, I can't live there. I will die if I stayed in Winnipeg. My brother already said, we're not going to be separated. We have been separated all the time. We're going to go. Because I said goodbye to my brothers and my sister, and I said, I'm not staying. I'll let you know where I am. I was alone in Europe anyways. So why shouldn't I be alone now? I wasn't afraid. I've been on myself for 5 years. So what's there to be afraid of? I knew how to defend myself. So back on the train, next thing, the train stops again. And I looked outside, there was just a little building with a red chimney with smoke coming out, nothing else, plain flat land. And I asked the lady, where are we? And she says, Calgary. I said, I'm not saying Calgary. I said, it's a small town. There's nothing here. I don't want to live in a small town. I'm a city girl. And the reason I don't want to live in a small town, you have to hide again because everybody knows you. In a city, you can hide and nobody knows you at all. So there I was again yelling, but they dropped off some survivors that were staying in Winnipeg, in Calgary. The lady, Jean Rose, said, Mariette, there's only one other place, and it's called Vancouver. And I said, is it by the ocean? And she said, yes. Is it raining more than snow? She said, yes. And I said, That's what I wrote on the application, because in Brussels, our weather in Vancouver at that time was like Brussels. And there was a happy time, and I thought of the ocean as a family good memory. And that's how I ended up on January the 3rd, 1948, at the foot of Granville Street at the train station, where I didn't meet at that time my foster father, who was there. Okay.
We're about to get there.
Okay, here we go.
Perfect. It's perfect. You just cue me right up, and then like you tee me up, and then I hit a home run. It's great. Okay, so we talked a little bit about how the Canadian Jewish community needed to bear the the financial burden and the responsibility of these incoming orphans. And so that meant that there were advertisements put out nationwide for host families. And we know that there were when a host family is told that they're going to be receiving a child that was an orphan in the war, many of them pictured in their mind a young child, probably under the age of 10. And we know that 1.5 million children died in the Holocaust. And so what they actually ended up with were really traumatized teenagers in most cases. And so the diversity of experiences with the survivors and the host families really was a wide range. Some had really beautiful experiences and some had really challenging experiences. So Mariette, you settled with the Satinov family in Vancouver, and can you tell us a bit about what that was like? So now you can go back to the train station, and when you meet the father of your host family, can you tell us a bit about that and go from there?
I didn't see him then. He had come, and only 7 of us out of the children came to Vancouver. They followed and came to Vancouver. They also wanted, you got to understand, we wanted to go to a place where no other child survivor was. That was my thinking. I wanted to be able to hide, and I had to do that. So I knew by coming to a new country, a new place, but the families that took in the children, my foster father, were married. I came in January to live with them. On April the 15th was their 30th anniversary. They had no children. But apparently, I was supposed to live with another family that had children. I was the youngest child that came to Vancouver in 1947 at that time. In 1950, there were 2 and 3 year olds. But when I came in 1947, I was the youngest of all those children. And when my dad apparently had come to the train station and told Jean Rose, I want that little girl. And unbeknown to me. And the next thing I know, after we had lunch, the Jewish Congress had prepared for us, I went to live with this family who my Russian and my Yiddish did not match. Mine was more of a street Yiddish and Russian that I'd learned on the street. You pick up like all children do. And so for 3 months, I really couldn't speak to them. So again, I was a child of silence. And as well, my foster father registered me. No, the Jewish Congress opened a classroom for the 7 of us to learn English, because Canada insisted that we do not speak our language, ever. When my sister and I can remember that like it was yesterday, we went on a bus to go downtown, and my sister and I, of course, spoke French. And the lady and the people on the bus were yelling at us, you foreigner, leave this country and only speak English. Go back to your country. So anti-Semitism was there as well, but we didn't know that was at the time. We were a burden. They thought we would be a burden in this country. The Jewish Congress opened a class for us to learn. I stayed exactly 1 week because the teacher only spoke to us in Yiddish. And I said, I won't be able to communicate. So I came home and I drew a picture, because picture, you don't need a language. I drew a school building, a little school building with a red chimney like I saw in Calgary with smoke coming out. And my dad understood. So he registered me in school. But I didn't want to, they didn't have ESL in those days, English second language. Nobody could speak my French. A French teacher I wasn't allowed to take because I contradicted her that her French was not proper. And so I was never allowed in Canada to go to French school because I belonged as well to the government. So the experience in Canada wasn't just the same way. To get married, I had to go to the Supreme Court to get permission for my husband, a Winnipeg-born Canadian, was asked if he wanted to really marry a survivor. I had to get permission. Canada was not a friendly place. I couldn't become a citizen until I was 21 years old. The laws had changed after the war when a Canadian married a European. She or he didn't become a Canadian right away. So from the age of 12 until I was 21, till I had already been married 3 years. I couldn't get a driver license. I didn't have a birth certificate, didn't have any. They took away my Belgian passport when I did apply for 6 months before my 21st birthday. I was checked on week after week to make sure I didn't break the law, because even then, to that time, they wanted to send me back. Canada was not a friendly place, but we survivors made it a friendly place. We're the one that really changed the children's laws. We're the one that pushed education much harder than anyone else. So the damaged goods that I was called as became a leader in this community. And one, as you heard, I was the co-founder of the Holocaust Education Center.
Thank you. How did your experience with your host family compare to other people that you know who settled with different host families?
Well, with my family and my brother Jack, of the 40 children that came to Vancouver, we're the only 2 that stayed with the same family. Mm-hmm. We were the 2 youngest. My brother Jacques is 19 months older than me. And he and I would be, I guess, the youngest, and being with a family that accepted our idiosyncrasies, that accepted that we were adult in a child's body, that they had to treat us as an adult, yet they wanted a child. But until I was able to speak to them, which was 3 months later. It takes 3 months to learn a language properly, because I only thought in French and I had to learn to think in English. French, you speak backwards to English. And it's also female and male. So it was difficult. I still find it difficult. Yes, I know I speak well in English, but it's still a learned language.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm also watching our time to make sure we're good for question and answer. So I have a few more questions, and then we're going to open up the question answer to the 3,000 students that we have with us today. So during your time in the Holocaust, you had to learn several survival techniques. First, sort of part A is, what were some of those techniques? And part B is, how have those techniques sort of stayed with you or are still with you in your current day life?
Ask me again, please.
So the survival techniques that you learned. I'll start with part A. So what were some of the survival techniques that you had to learn as a child to survive when you were sort of on the run, if you want to call it that?
Never ask directions, never ask questions, never argue. If you're asked the questions on the street while you were hiding, your name is Mariette. That's it. I never inquired on anything. How to survive in the woods, how to survive and on roads, how to stay away from dirty old men, how to stay away from dirty old women. The technique stays with you, that even to this day, I believe in my instincts. I am, as I have told you, Michelle, when I meet you, I either trust you or I don't. I have no gray lines. My husband used to say, Mariette, find a gray line with someone, because I used to say, don't do business with this person, and I ended up being right. So even to the day, my instincts is still what is my survival technique. You will never know that I don't trust you. You will never know that I don't like you. I will be polite, but indifferent. I still, survival technique, I still go to a restaurant and I walk in and I look for an escape door. I was out Saturday night with friends. I asked her to move so that I could look at the front door. I still look for, it's something that's embedded in a poor child that had to learn that in life so early without anyone around. I'm grateful to the Christians, the church, the convents that must have taught me right from wrong as well.
I have one more sort of wartime question, if you want to call it that. In your book, you talk about your experience with the silver bird. And I was wondering if you could just sort of tell us the short version of that part of your story.
That was the beginning of my story in Europe. When the Nazi invaded Brussels, my mother took us 6 children to go to walk to Paris. We couldn't travel. And my memory is of a road with 2 ditches on each side of the road. And my brother, I was little, my brother Henri carried me on his shoulders. And I looked up and I saw a silver bird in the sky. And I thought, I'd never seen a silver bird. I'm a little kid. I don't know anything about a silver bird. And I banged on Henri's head and I said to him, Henri, regarde, look. Look, doesn't pay attention to me. And then I looked up and I see beautiful stars coming out of the silver bird. And I'm so excited. I am so excited. I'm seeing all these stars around the bird. And I'm now banging on my brother's head. And I said, tu dois voir. Henri, tu dois voir. You have to look. He looked up, and the next thing I know, I am thrown in a ditch. My mother is pushed, Henri and Esther were pushed in a ditch, and those stars happened to be machine guns being fired at us on the road, trying to flee to Paris, where my sister was living. My brother Henri saved our lives, but that's the day I learned about death and about blood, lots of blood, and about a lot of screaming that you learn, just like the siren when the bombs were flying. It's always there. And so having those sirens that I hear in Israel, for us survivors, we have lived through that. We know that. It takes 10 seconds for the bomb to fall and hurt and kill you. So the past and the future seems to be all together now since October the 7th.
Absolutely. So you mentioned a couple of times today that you were trained to be a child of silence, but now you spend a lot of your time really doing the opposite and speaking about your experiences. Why did it become such a priority for you to speak after all this time?
Well, it started a long time ago when we started the Holocaust Education Center, when we saw that the anti-Semitism was rising, even 40 years ago. Not as much and as front as it is today, but it was there. We knew it. We could feel it. And so we started, as survivors, we started the Center of Education, and it took 50 years for us to get the education of the Holocaust for grade 6 and grade 11 in a public school. But we fought for it and we got it in, but it took 50 years of education. We child survivors that lived off the street did not think we had a story. We only wanted the camp survivors to speak out. So at that time, being a good leader, I helped get the survivors of camps to speak out and to go into the schools. So that's how it started. Myself, until the camp survivors started to get dementia and too old to speak. So I got Dr. Rob Krell and I got the child survivor to start and they also asked us to write books. We did not. I didn't feel I had a story because camp survivors have stories. But then 35 years ago, we decided to form a group of child survivors who we still meet twice a month. Even today, we are still the child survivors that we meet without our husbands or wives. And it's a safe place for us survivors to talk out our hurt that we don't tell our children, that we don't tell our husbands, that we don't tell our grandchildren unless they ask. And I did that to my children too. I did not speak to my children when they were growing up. But my daughters do volunteer for Holocaust Educational Center. And in the future, I hope they will be the next speaker when I'm gone.
Not for a long, long time.
I'll try.
Okay, so I've got like 1.5 more questions before we open it up to the Q&A. So you wrote a beautiful book. You wrote a beautiful book with the help of Dr. Lauren Rossi, who's a historian who helped you with the fact checking, in addition to the editing team with the Azrieli Foundation. So can you tell us a little bit about the process of writing your story and fact checking those memories that you knew that you had?
I was again very beschert, fate. Dr. Lauren Rossi was one of my historian mediators when I spoke at Symposium at UBC in the past. And when COVID started, she called me and said, "Can I meet with you?" And I said, "Okay." And she came over. We both double masked, and she came over and she said, "Let me write your story." And for 40 years, I've been asked to write my story, and I thought I didn't have anything to tell. And I told her that. And she says, "Mariette, I've heard you speak. You have a story of a child." And I said, "But it's a memory. And I have searched as far as I can search with my brother, Jack. And we've only got a little bit of material that I can't get anymore." But I said to her, "Why do you want to do this? You're a professor at university." She says, "I have to do this, not because I feel you have a story, and the way you tell your story is the way you said you want to tell. The way I speak is the way my book is written." And she captured it. It took a couple of years. Very fortunate. We sent it to 4 publishers, and 3 answered within 5 days. We sent a synopsis, and one of them was the Azrieli. And I picked the Azrieli, which I'm thankful for, because they give it away to children to learn. And that's always been my work, is to work with children for education. And really, it surprised Azrieli and myself how well it flew off the shelf. That had to be printed within 8 months of the first printing. And I've done now the audiobook in my own voice, telling the story, the book, and also the French book, as Michelle said, will be out in May, I think. So the French community,
August.
August, sorry. It'll be in August. And so the French Montreal community that I didn't want to stay will read my story as well, because we are a two-language country.
Absolutely.
So I'm grateful to Dr. Rossi because she was able to prove through records that my memory were true. Some of them that we couldn't prove, we didn't put in the book. The book started a big book of 300 words. It came down to only 156, I think. I'm not sure what the size of the book is, my book. But she was able, as an historian, to delve more into the history and historical places in Brussels and in Europe that I described. And so the book is a factual, because Azrieli Company does, and Foundation and publish do not put anything in their books that they can't prove. So with that, as I said before to Michelle, how many times have I said thank you? Because, but I'm telling you, teachers, do have the opportunity to give your students, it will help you teach. Also, there is a information book on how to teach it, and that Michelle can tell you about through the Azrieli Foundation. I urge you to try it. And thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Belle, who's going to help coordinate our question and answer period now.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to give Kelly Hebert, who is a teacher, the opportunity to say a few words about a program that we are developing here for teachers. Kelly, I think you just need to unmute yourself. There you go. And
all right. Can everyone hear me?
Can I see you? Can I see your face?
I have a nice, beautiful beard. I don't know if I can.
I'd like that.
Well, yeah, thank you so much, Marie and Michelle, for the work that you do and for sharing your experiences, and Belle, for all the work that you do in promoting Holocaust education. And so we've started a program for educators here in Manitoba where we want to take around 25 educators from whatever grades to do a tour of sites of memory of the Holocaust from July 14th to 28th in 2025, where we'll be going through Poland, Austria, and Germany. And so I just wanted to give some information. You guys can you can touch base with me. The email is MBHOLOCAUST so Manitoba Holocaust Initiative @gmail.com. You guys can contact me, and I'm sure it'll be made available for more details. I don't want to take up too much time because the Q&A is really important, but it's something that we're starting. We're very excited about developing, and we want to give educators a chance to immerse themselves in these sites, which will change your life and transform how you teach and how you understand the Shoah. So I hope I was succinct enough, and I thank you again for your time and for this opportunity. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly. And if anyone has any questions, you all have my email, so you can reach out to me and I can put you in touch with Kelly. So we have a few questions that have come in. Carrie Martin from Oak Park High School, another extraordinary teacher, would like to know, how did you manage to stay with and reunite with your siblings?
Very good question. Also, we had a family whistle that we were taught right from the early stage. I'm not a whistler. Take me years to even learn to whistle. But when we saw each other on the street, we would use the whistle as a connection, because I was told never to contact if I saw my family, never to reach out, never to acknowledge them. by putting notes on those pillars on information boards that we're hoping that our family would use and see, not our name. Mariette was a very common name, so it made no difference. But we found each other by accident, by fluke. My sister was Esther, who apparently had been looking through, who was 3.5 years older than me. I was looking for me after the war. I couldn't, of course, couldn't find me. At that time, I was in an orphanage for younger children, and she was in middle school type of thing, of orphanage. And each orphanage had an older person, sister, looking after a girl. Excuse me. And this older sister, not connected to family, but it was an older child looking after a younger child in the orphanage. Her sister was in my orphanage. And she used to come and visit her sister, who I also kind of befriended because we were both kind of sick with la gale, a disease of the war, scurvy that I had during the war because of lack of vitamins and everything else. And she told my sister Esther that she thinks she found my sister. So it was a miracle in that way. Henri always knew where I was because my brother Henri taught me how to survive on the streets, to defend myself. Jack, Esther knew where Jack was. I also was in a Catholic convent where I had to be kidnapped out because they felt I would be a good Christian child because I learned Latin and I learned the prayers and I sang Ave Maria and Midnight Mass at Christmas time. So they wanted to keep me. So I had to be kidnapped out of the convent, which I walked out of by myself.
Thank you. Another question from Carrie before I move on to someone else. A very interesting question. How has your Jewish faith influenced your life?
I'm asked that every single time. It's amazing. Remember I said children are taught their religion and hate and love. I was fortunate that my foster father was a founder of the Beth Israel Synagogue here in Vancouver, which I happened to be the first woman ever president when it was not acknowledged in those days. He used to take me to the synagogue. And one Friday night, I was singing or humming a song, unbeknownst that I was doing it. And my dad said, "De versteh? You understand?" And I didn't know I was really singing. Anyway, he introduced me to the cantor, and I sang in the Beth Israel choir as soloist for 27 years. So I learned Hebrew. I learned how to read Torah because women weren't supposed to learn, but on Shabbat he would read the Torah. So I learned how beside him. I'm hungry for learning. I still am, even at my age. I find it very fascinating about new things.
Thank you.
Well,
Trisha would like to know if there was an occasion where you were almost caught and put in a concentration camp, or just almost caught.
Yes, 2 days before the end of the war. We thought it was Victory Day. Everyone came out of hiding. It was 2 days before the end, May the 10th. This was on May the 8th. May the 10th is my birthday. We were all picked up and taken to the train station. I was again very lucky. I was the last one pushed in this train where we were pushed like sardines standing up. And I was able to breathe because of the slats of the gate. When I think about it, I hear the clanging of the lock. And I was breathing against the the door because it was so tight. And I'm asked as well, what did I think? And I can't remember thinking about anything. It was like, c'est fini. So whatever. It doesn't matter. When you see so much death, it doesn't matter anymore.
So how did that then, how were you off the
Okay.
train eventually?
So when the train stopped and clang, clang, clang of the train, the door opened. And in front of me was this German SS officer in his black uniform with his swastikas on his lapel, shiny boots, his hat, his revolver on a leather strap attached to his waist, with his gun in his right hand, a baton with sticks, leather, held by a leather strap. And he, in his German, said, "What is my sister doing on this train?"
Oh.
I looked to the left, I looked to the right, I'm the only child. I was in Germany. I learned to speak German. I lived there for quite a few months. So I was able to understand. So I turned into a German child. He took me off the train, put me on his motorcycle and drove me outside of the Brussels and dropped me off. Years later, I found out that this officer used to come Friday night to my house and remembered me in my mother's arms. He was my brother Jean's best friend when he was going to university. So the bad and the good that I saw through the war, I saw the good on that day. So I was saved by a Gestapo officer that probably killed thousands. So again, we shared miracles.
One among so many. Scott Van Cassiel, I hope I pronounced your name right, Scott, asks, why were you told when you arrived that you would all be dead by the age of 30?
The medical department that we're finding out now, of course, that we've been working on, and Dr. Krell has written a book about it. He just published it, I think. He was a 2-year-old in Holland, hidden child. He was a medical doctor. He went to medical school, and he found that the psychiatric department really didn't understand the survivors, didn't know how to treat us, didn't know how to speak to us, didn't know why we wouldn't cry, why we didn't cry, why we didn't want to talk, because we were told when we came to Canada, forget the past, let it go, leave it alone. Today, we are writing about the psychiatric department knew nothing about our mentality because the Holocaust had never been in their lives and didn't know how to treat each child individually without teaching them at all, but how to get them to, we got them to talk. Like in my group of 35 survivors, we need to talk to each other even after all these years. And to be told we were going to die because we were weak. And yet we had to go through a grueling time of medical research before we could come to Canada, accepted in Canada. We couldn't have a cavity in our teeth. I didn't even know what a cavity was. Who had cavities in Europe? Who had sweets to have cavities?
Yeah, and some children I know were rejected because they had flat feet.
That's right.
All kinds of things like that. And
Occupied everything.
we certainly have interesting letters in our archive as well about comments about the child survivors and, not expecting much from certain individuals. It's and the whole concept of PTSD, of course, did not even exist at the time. So I certainly know what you're saying. And the kind of help that refugees get today, including mental health help, simply didn't exist. It was just go on with your life. So Tracy Salamandra, so
Excuse me,
go ahead.
excuse me. That
Yes.
is what I'm saying, that
Mhm.
we survivor did a lot for the community.
Mhm.
We're the one that medically went into search of how to help the child survivor.
Absolutely. Tracy Salamandra is teaches grade 9 and 10 in Hartney, Manitoba. And she asks if you came to love Canada despite the rough start that you had.
I love Canada, but I can say we're not better, or I love my country. This is my country. It may not be the country of my birth, but I'm a great Canadian citizen.
Thank you. Now, Julianne Delacqui has a question, and that just reminded me that I wanted to say that there will be a lot of readers in French in Manitoba for the French translation, because we actually have a large Francophone community, and we have many both French immersion and Français milieu schools here, and a Francophone school division. So Julianne asks, where did you hide during the war before you left for Canada? Where did you hide during the war?
I would say half of Europe. Like I said, I've been to Germany. I can't prove I was in Sweden because I have no records there, but I was there. I have been in Switzerland, where I've climbed the mountains to hide. I was asked by Berlin to be their guest speaker at their House of Parliament as a survivor, which I refused. I wasn't ready. I am ready now, but I was not ready just before COVID. I was asked to be their guest speaker. I've been in Antwerp. I've been in Holland. I've traveled half the world, and especially to come to Canada.
So I think she was asking where you were hidden, where you hid during the war,
All over.
all over
because-
those places.
because I was moved from place to place, unbeknownst that I was being used
As
in
for the
different languages
resistance.
to pass messages.
Fabulous. Wow, that is so interesting. Noah from Grey Academy, which is a Jewish school here, asks if you had any close encounters or other experiences other than the one that you just related at the end of the war with any Nazis during the war.
One of my husband's employees came to my house. We're in the building business. We were in the building business. And he was one of his workers, had to pick up something from my house. I invited him in and to wait for my husband. He was on the phone. And as I'm serving him coffee, I stopped, went to my husband and said, he's a Nazi. Turned out he was. I recognized. I didn't. My husband says, do you want me to fire him? I said, it's something that, he says, how do you know? And I said, look at his ear. He had his ear shot off right there. And the way he talked, he was older than me. So of course he had his German accent. And I walked out of my house until he left.
And actually, pursuant to that question, there's another question from Max at the Grey Academy that asks what your thoughts are about Germany today.
Germany is a friend to us today.
Mhm.
It has been. It has helped a lot of survivors by sustaining them in this life, because they have no children, they are sick, they're in old folks' homes, they have no family, and they get an allowance, so they're paid for their upkeep and their food and their clothing. I am grateful for that.
Amber Olford asks, and she's from East Selkirk Middle School, was it difficult to go to school and to get a job with the lack of education that you had at such a young age?
I didn't get a job right away. I wanted to work. I started grade 1, and I did grade 1 to grade 6 in 10 months, less than a year. I did 14 and a half years of school in 7.5 years. I went to University of UBC. At that time, there was only 3 buildings here. I did have a normal education, but also survivors were always hungry. So we always went to the library, we read, we got jobs. I wasn't hired because I had a French accent. As a woman, it was very difficult. I fought every job. Every job I applied, I got the job. I've had a lot of different jobs that I wanted to learn. I've been a secretary. I've been the first woman insurance underwriter in British Columbia, a woman. I still feel like I don't have enough education. It doesn't stop. And we survivors are constantly reading. It's, I guess, something because we didn't have the upbringing, the guideline. We weren't allowed to read. We weren't allowed. But yet, when I knew music, I knew operas. I knew titles of books of Europe. I knew specialists of names. I wanted to find out about them. What do they contribute? And every survivors contributed to this country. We needed to share. We're still doing it, not even at our age.
So what did it feel like, though, to be in a class with children that were so much younger than you on the one hand, and also that had such different life experience, being, born in Canada? What did that feel like?
Bullied. I was bullied. I was laughed at.
Hmm.
I was named. People called me names. I wasn't accepted. I wasn't included. So I picked up sports. I did music. I did school plays. I had the leads in the school plays because my voice, you don't need languages to sing. You learn to sing the song by the words. I think I moved one foot in front of the other. Whatever came my way, I went through it and just moved on. I never looked back. My philosophy has always been, my footstep in the snow only goes one way.
Hmm.
A footstep in the back is my reputation and my life.
There's so many wonderful questions here. It's really hard for me to choose, but here is an interesting one from Lori Binder, who's the head of school at Grey Academy. Have you encountered any anti-Semitism recently in Canada? Personally?
I have not. I just have, the only thing I found that when it full bloomed, that the friends I thought were my friends not contacted me. I've not said anything, so I give them the benefit of the doubt, thinking like when you go to a house of Shiva or a house of mourning, you don't know what to say to the person that's bereaved who has done the loss. Your presence is what counts, not your words. I found that even some of my Jewish friends did not reach out either. Because it's a complex situation of hard to understand when you are born in a free country. And So my expectation for the first time was hurt. I never expected anything in my life. Anything that came was a joy. So this was something that that people were hiding who we were. I think that's all it is. The students at the universities are afraid. I went to speak at Simon Fraser University. 2 of the students in the class were afraid, the teacher told me, were afraid to attend. They were the only 2 Jewish students in the Holocaust class that I was speaking at. I've spoken at Hillel. The students came out to hear me, which was amazing. They had to cross the boundary lines. But they came. That's our strength. I'm hoping that our Jewish children have learned that we are strong, that we are here to stay. We are not going to be abused. School in Vancouver were very abusive, just like they are today. I was pushed down the stairs, my hair in the inkwells. In those days, we didn't have a pen. You had to have inkwells. I overcame it.
Well, before I thank you, I know that schools need to get their kids out at 3:30 in general. But a very interesting question from Scott. With all your experiences in the war, did you experience any difficulties as a wife and mother?
My only difficulty was that we found out our first child suffered. They suffered because they didn't understand and we didn't say anything, but we were overprotective. We were afraid they'd cross the street to see a friend. We wouldn't let them sleep overnight to their friends. All our friends had to come to our house to sleep. All the children after school, she couldn't go to her friends after school. They had to come to my house. We were overprotective of our child. And so we gave them, each child of the first survivor, the second generation, we had given them a kind of a suitcase to carry, a burden that we didn't know we handed to them. And that is for every first child born from a survivor. You
Yes.
learn how to release after you have more than one child.
And we know, of course, today about intergenerational trauma as well. Aricia from Petrushin from Sisler High School said, we would like to thank you on behalf of École Sisler High School, repeated by Tracy and many of the other teachers. And I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. I repeat that all of you out there, students and teachers, you have heard this important testimony. You are now a witness, and you need to carry that forward. You need to carry the torch for Mariette and all the other survivors as you go about your life. And also, I'll probably be reaching out to the attendees with some questions for your students and for yourself. And I just want to thank all of you for attending today, and especially to Michelle and Mariette. And thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. Michelle, as usual, thank you for guiding me through this. Young people out there, stand up and be counted. Thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you both. Bye-bye.
Bye.